Because creative people really have a hard time being successful and keeping that mindset of creativity when they're being constantly slammed and derailed and told you're not good enough. And so I'm here to tell you, you are good enough. You are passionate enough. If you have a passion and a desire to create things, and create it. Even if no one else looks at it, create it for you. You need to remember that falling in love with the passion of creating art is all about creating art. It's not about who looks at it. Hey, my name is Chris. I'm the owner of Stafford Studios, and welcome to the Stafford Studios Podcast. Recently, it has been called Music, Movies, and Modern Entrepreneurs, but we've kind of taken a few months break, not intentionally, just because we got so overwhelmed. We started adding people to the team. We were doing a lot of really cool stuff, and since this podcast is not the main priority of our business, we kind of had to, unfortunately, put it on the side. But now, I wanted to get back into it. I also want to try to focus on people who have achieved great things. So it may not be music. I mean, some episodes may talk about music. We may talk about entertainment and movies. We may talk about entrepreneurship, but there are some people that I do want to interview that just have a high achievers mindset. So those are the things that I'm passionate about. I think that life is about connecting with people that share the same interests as you and passions as you. I've been very fortunate to have done a lot of things in my life, and I have several passions over the years as I have dedicated time to each of these crafts and my passions, that I just want to try to connect with people who are like-minded. Maybe as we do this a little longer, we may narrow it down as to what type of stuff we talk about. But my thing is I just love too many things to not talk about stuff. So I'm going to be interviewing people who have accomplished great things, people who are passionate and successful in music, people who are in the entertainment industry, or just people who just love the same type of movies and TVs and entertainment that I do, and modern entrepreneurs. I'm also going to be doing reviews about some camera gear. I'm going to be talking a lot about video production as well. But the thing is I love so many things other than just video production. I've got, really successful family members who have started their own business that I'd like to interview. I've also got a lot of friends who have achieved some really amazing things in life. And I just like to talk to people who are successful. One of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast is because I love talking to people who have the mindset of excellence. And so to me, if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to do it the best I can. We've recently rebranded our website, and I wanted to kind of rebrand this podcast as well. I wanted to give just a quick, brief intro as to why Stafford Studios exists and how we got here. What is it all about? What is this podcast even meant to do? What is it for? And so I wanted to kind of just give an introduction to myself and how Stafford Studios came to be. I'm really looking forward to having some of our team members and videographers here on the team come on the podcast as well. But basically, this podcast is just about everything that I'm passionate about, but also it just has to do with the level of excellence. I believe that the things we go through in life and the things that we are passionate about can connect us to people in life that are either going through the same things we've been through or that are about to go through the same things we've been through, whether that's good or bad. And so I've been through several things that kind of led me to this point. And one of my favorite passions is I love to talk about exciting things with people who were just as excited about it as I am. I don't know if you've ever listened to an album of one of your favorite bands. My favorite band of all time, I've got a few favorite bands, but one of my top favorite bands of all time is Coldplay. And it's kind of like when your favorite band launches an album and it's like super amazing. And you go to show one of your friends, you're like, man, this song is so freaking awesome. And you go to show it to them and they're like, meh, it's okay. I want to talk about Stranger Things. I want to talk about Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon. I want to talk about all things amazing music that has to do with the media industry. I want to talk about movies. I want to talk about freaking Dune and my favorite directors and composers and cinematographers of all time. I want to talk about some of my favorite business owners that I've seen. So this podcast is going to kind of have to deal with all of that. So I just want to kind of tell you where I come from. So I'm born and raised in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, graduated from Oak Grove High and graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi to the top in 2008. And my degree is in entertainment industry and music production and music management. So my background is in music. Anybody who has ever known me, that's the only thing I ever wanted to do growing up was music. That was my biggest passion, still one of my biggest passions. And a lot of people say oh, you started this video production stuff, you don't do music anymore. Well, just because I don't perform live places doesn't mean that I still don't do music or still don't love music. I'm fortunate enough to volunteer and serve at our local church here in Pascagoula, but I've started writing some more music. I still love music just as much as I always have, but I've realized that the older I get and the more I go through, I always thought that I had to do music. Like if I didn't do music as a career or a profession, then I was a failure. Not that anybody told me that. That's just kind of how I felt. That being said, I just have a huge background in music. I studied for several years under Dr. Lawrence Guaz, who was actually the first guest on my podcast. I learned classical saxophone from him, and I was a 4-year member of the Mississippi All-State Lions Band. I was first chair 3 of those years. Not to brag, but to kind of let you know that that's my background. I strived for excellence in everything that I did. Like once I found out I could be first chair, I was like, that's all I ever want to do. Like no one's ever going to beat me, not to sound cocky, but I had that mentality of I'm going to give the best I can because I know, number one, that God's given that to me. But number two, like, I don't want to waste my talents. Like if I want to achieve the best and be the best that I can be. So I was very fortunate enough to be a member of the Lions Band for 4 years, which as a high schooler, that's the best thing you can do is in high school, is the All-State Lions Band. You travel over the world. That's the best thing you could do. So then towards the end of high school, I started getting really into music as far as like being a singer-songwriter, started learning all these instruments. I played music in my youth group in my church and just had a really big passion for that and felt like I wanted to take the singer-songwriter route. And my goal was to move to Nashville. I had worked with some composers and songwriters at some Christian record labels in Nashville. And my goal was to move out there to try to write some songs, pitch songs to record labels. I pitched a few songs to some labels and they liked them. It wasn't necessarily a good fit, but I still loved music. So through all that, I ended up meeting my wife, Katie, in college and fell in love. We got married. Early on in our marriage, I kind of felt the call to be in ministry. And, throughout high school and college, I thought that my career was going to be singer, songwriter, but also like worship leader at a church. So some of you are like, wow, that's crazy, but I love to play on a stage with worship teams. I know that worship is not all about that. Church is not all about that. But when you've done that, it's just one of my favorite environments. I love being with the team. I love leading a church. We kind of felt the call to go into ministry. Long story short, my wife's family is from Leakesville, and through some crazy doors that opened, we found out that they were looking for a youth pastor at First Baptist Leakesville, which is crazy because that's not what I wanted to do. I had no interest or experience in wanting to be a youth pastor, but it was just kind of like I visited there one time, worked with the kids a little bit, and I was working at a bank at the time. So I was full-time banking. I was a teller, and then I did some insurance work with the bank as well. So I would work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and then on Wednesdays and Sundays, I'd drive up about an hour to Leakesville, or actually down to Leakesville, and just work with the kids, man. I fell in love. I was like, this is it. So I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a youth pastor, going to be in the ministry. And while working with those youth students, I really discovered a passion for making videos. Now, my videos back then were absolutely horrific. And I didn't set out to like, oh, I'm going to make a video. I want to be a filmmaker. No, I would take this rinky-dink camera and just turn it on and hit record. Like no settings, no nothing. But I would make highlight videos of all the trips we went through. Like if we'd had a lock-in or if we went canoeing or if we did all these things, I would just make highlight videos. And I really enjoyed telling stories through video. And actually, me and my brother and my cousins, we used to make videos all the time. Every time we'd go out to California and visit family when I was growing up, we'd bring a little camcorder and I would just record everything. And then we would just make little videos. So I think my passion for filmmaking really started when I was as young as in high school, because like I said, I used to play a lot of music in high school. So I kind of developed passion for all of these things at once. I enjoyed music composition, music theory, the classical, the jazz, but I also started to discover singer, songwriter. I felt very comfortable and at home being in front of people. You put me on a stage in front of 10,000 people, I wouldn't blink an eye. It's just comfort. It's just comforting to me, and it's a very easy environment for me to be in. It just felt that way. I never sought out to just, I want to be the next, greatest singer songwriter, but it was just fun and I enjoyed it, and people seemed to enjoy listening to me. So anyways, through high school and all the music and just background of making highlight videos. I mean, back then there was no YouTube, there was no Facebook. So I would just time the camcorder, like I'd record something and then stop, and then figured out what I wanted to record next, and then just hit record again. And then, so all these trips and lines, man, me and all these guys would get together and we would make these ridiculously corny videos. And they're still some of my favorite things to go back and watch because I love telling stories. So fast forward all that, I was a youth pastor. Position came open at the church in Leakesville for us to move down there. And I kind of took over the music as well. So I was the music director and the youth pastor full-time in Leakesville, making like $24,000 a year. It was amazing. Not that money matters, but I didn't realize how poor I was till back then. So anyways, did that for like 2 or 3 years. It was the best time of my life, some of the best memories. I learned more from those students, and they blessed me and blessed my life more than I could have, ever done with anything else and anybody else. So I did that for 2 or 3 years. And then it kind of got to the point to where, not necessarily in the youth ministry, but the church as a whole is a very traditional church, very old school mentality. And all of this has no meaning to be negative towards anything. This is just my story of how we started. A lot of great people at First Baptist at the time. I just felt like I hit my ceiling. I hit my limit. I wanted to try to grow the church and reach people and change things. And, I've always wanted to be innovative, and I always try to do creative things and be the best that I can. I think that's just the competitor's heart that I've had my whole life. I didn't do sports, but I was just as competitive in music and competitions, if not more, than any other athlete I ever met. Like, I used to eat, breathe, and sleep music. And so all that being said, is I always strive to be the best, I always strive to be my best. And so I felt like I hit a ceiling there at that church. I wanted to grow. I felt like I just couldn't grow where I was at. I loved the students, had nothing to do with the student ministry. It was more so the main church as a whole, as I had some really good ideas, visions of what I wanted to do and how to serve the church. Didn't align with the main pastor. And so it was, I found out that there was a church hiring down here on the coast, Pascagoula. And there was a position that opened. And at the time, I swore it was the right decision. I was like, this is it. This is the door that's open. God's calling me down here to be a youth pastor here on the coast. And so it was one of the hardest decisions I've made, because I loved those youth students in Leakesville like they were my own, like they were my younger brothers and sisters. So it was really, really hard to kind of step away from that. And there's days where I still feel a little bit of guilt at that, because some of those kids were like in the middle of some of the most important years of their life. And I felt like, man, I should have never left. But in the time, you think it's the right decision. So I came down here. I ended up working at a church here in Pascagoula as youth pastor. So I came on and working with students, completely different vibe. It was a very non-traditional church, contemporary. At the time, it looked really good from the outside. Looked like everything was really great and healthy and awesome. And then after about a week of being on staff, I was like, this is the biggest mistake I've ever made. I didn't tell my wife at the time, because we just uprooted our family, moved down here, and I was making all of a grand $32,000 a year there. It was great. Actually, it was a lot less than that, because that was before my housing salary came out. So I was making $25K a year. It was amazing. It was just the most money I thought I was ever going to make in my entire life. So I was making $25,000 a year. I don't know how me and my wife lived off that, but we did. So moved there, was working with the students. It was a lot different. The culture down here was really different. I had a really hard time connecting with the students. There was a lot of students from different areas, different cities, different counties that came to this church. I tried getting involved, going to their schools, visiting them, but it's just a whole different culture. It was just really hard. I absolutely knew this was the wrong decision, as soon as I got here. I felt like the wool was pulled over my eyes. I felt like I was tricked into, I felt like it was just the truth wasn't being told to me. And then after I got hired, I started learning a lot of the truth about this church. And so long story short, I was working there. I almost immediately knew I wanted to leave. Within 2 weeks, I was like, this is not it. This is not it. This is not what I'm trying to do with my life. I felt depressed. I worked under a very verbally abusive and abrasive, narcissistic leader. And I'm telling you this because it changed my life. I went to a depression. I was borderline suicidal. Forget music, forget video, forget everything. I didn't even want to live. I felt like I was around my family when I was off. And I just was extremely disconnected. I felt like I was living in a fog. I felt like nothing was going right, going my way. I was threatened to be fired almost every day that I walked in. I was told that I was not good enough. I was overly critiqued in everything that I did. So I went from this environment of like, I was the best at what I was. I was very creative. I was celebrated for my creativity, for my passion, for my innovation to lead. And then all of a sudden I was beat down every single day, told that I was not good enough. I mean, I was critiqued on what type of clothes I wore. I was critiqued on how I stood on stage, holding my guitar. If I took too many steps backwards when I wasn't singing, it was crazy. I would get yelled at. I would get told that I was nothing. So I was like beat down every single day. So as that was going on, so the guy who was doing worship at the time was media director. He did all the media, did all the graphics for the church, and I just did students. So he did like music and media, and I did students. Well, the media became overwhelming for him, and so the pastor was like, hey, we're going to give you the media department. And I was like, okay, cool. So I'm doing youth ministry full-time, 40 hours a week. And now I'm doing media production full-time, 40 hours a week. So that's a total of 80 hours a week. I was working ridiculous hours and didn't get a single pay increase at all. So I was taking on all this extra work. I was forced to miss family functions. I had to miss several of my own kids' birthday parties when they were young. It was such an abusive environment. It was unbelievable. It was the worst. I worked under the worst person I've ever met in my entire life, and that drained all of my creativity. I didn't want to do music anymore. I didn't want to touch a guitar. I didn't want to do anything with video. So as I'm still trying to get my foot out the door, saying this is such an abusive and aggressive environment, like it was crazy. Like I can work under hard people. I've worked tough jobs, but this took narcissism to a whole new level. And so I'm telling you all this to kind of tell you everything that I've been through has led to my company being formed. And so went through a very, very, very hard time, to the point where I didn't want to be in the ministry anymore. I was like, I spend my whole life preparing for this. I get this job and it's like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to live. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to use the gifts that God has called me to do. I mean, this pastor would call me in his office and question me and be like, do you even believe in God? Do you think you're called for this? Like it was like a personal, I don't know what I ever did to that person, but long story short, once the worship leader, everyone thought and was told that he was transitioning and that he chose to leave, but he was fired. And so anyways, when he was fired, I took over the worship. So I was doing 3 positions. I was doing student ministry. I had a student ministry of over 200 students. I was doing media production, which was customized videos, green screen videos, graphics, website stuff, lyrics, ProPresenter, everything. And I was the worship leader. I was in charge of all the worship for students in the main church. So I was doing what's kind of called this infuse thing where I was training the youth students. So I was working 3 full-time positions and still making the same amount of money, $25,000 a year. It was great. Like I said, on paper, it was $35,000, but they took all of my housing allowance out of that. And so it was like, I received my first check and I was like, I cannot live off this for 2 weeks with my family. They hired someone, because I told the pastor for months, I was like, this is too much. I can't do this. I'm literally working like 100 hours a week. I never see my family. I would show up to work an hour or 2 hours early, work all day. I would leave home, come eat dinner, and we lived kind of on campus. And then I would go back to work and work until midnight. Like I didn't see my wife. She was a single mom for like 2 years. Never saw my kids, never saw my wife. And I told the pastor, I was like, I'm about to break. Like, I cannot do this anymore. It's not necessarily that I don't want to. The workload is too much. So they hired a guy to take over media. They're like, all right, well, we'll take over media. We're going to let you do youth ministry and we're going to let you do worship. So youth, worship. So you don't have to still working 2 full-time positions. They hired a guy to do media, and the media itself was so overwhelming, he couldn't do it, and he got fired. So I'm like, okay, so I'm doing these 3 jobs so well that they can't hire anyone else because they try to hire someone to take over it, and they do a train wreck of a job as compared to what I'm doing. Not to hate on that person either. He was a good guy, but it was just like, his full-time job, 40 hours a week, was media production. That was a third of my job, and he couldn't do it. He did it so bad they fired him after like 2 months. So then I was back to doing that. They did eventually give me a little bit of a raise. I think I got like a $10,000 raise a year that last 6 months. It's like, we're going to pay you an extra 10 grand a year. And I thought my life changed. Like, this is amazing. I'm making $43,000 a year. Take away all the housing, it's making like $32,000 a year, working 3 full-time jobs. It was crazy. So all that being said, I went through the worst time of my entire life. I swore I would never touch music, never do video again. But here's the thing, while I was there, I learned a lot, not from this abusive pastor, but I learned of what not to do. I learned how not to treat people. I learned a lot about video production. So my job was to create videos. So I learned, I basically made myself learn After Effects, Premiere, Final Cut, Adobe Audition, Photoshop, Illustrator. So during my job, I'd set aside certain days of the week to do certain jobs, and I would say, all right, well, I've got to do this. I want to be the best that I can. So I got to learn certain aspects of video production, which eventually down the road would help me with my business. So I do not credit this church or this pastor for helping me in any way. They were kind of chiseling me down and getting rid of things that I didn't realize in the moment that I didn't need. So long story short, I basically started looking for another job. I was like, I can't do this. Like I was looking to be a trash guy on the back of the truck for the city. I was doing anything. I was putting out applications. Like, I've got to get out of here. Like, I'm going to literally die if I stay here. Well, the pastor found out and that I was putting out applications and pretty much fired me. He goes, oh, so you don't want to work here? He told me he was going to give me a couple months to find a job, help me find somewhere to live. And then a week later, he said, you've got, a week to get out of the house. So I lost my job, lost the house we lived in. And actually, I just, like 2 days after he was going to fire me, I had a wreck in my car. So I had no vehicle, no house, no job. He put me out on the street. So then that was a huge turning point in my life. So I went from this celebrated creative person who was told that I have all these gifts, all these wonderful things, and to a position where I was beat down every day. I was lied about. This pastor would, I had a mentor that went to another church, and he said he would call my mentor, and they would talk trash about me behind my back, which was never true. But, there were so many things he would lie about. It was just such the worst environment I could have ever been in. So I got out of there. My reputation was ruined. Everyone in the church was talking about me. After we left, he told the church that it was my choice to leave, but he fired me. And then after we left, he would continue to talk trash about us, like to his congregation. People would stop me in Walmart and be like, Chris, man, this pastor's, told me that the reason, you left is you had marital problems, you had finance problems. There were so many, he was talking lies about us from the pulpit to his entire church because he couldn't control me anymore. He wanted to control how people saw me. So that's the thing about narcissists and about abusive people. When they can't control you anymore and you get out from under them, they want to go to everyone else and lie about you and talk and they want to control how other people see you. They want to control your image. So I was lied about. I mean, people would come up to me and be like, man, I didn't know that you did this. I'm like, I never did that, or you got accused of this, but like, I never did that. I got a job at Ingalls. I was one of the highest testing electricians in the electrical apprentice program. And when he found out that I got the job at Ingalls, he went around and told people that he paid for my application and he got me that job, which was a complete lie because there was no application and he did not give me that job. I got the job on my own. So even when I left, I worked at Ingalls. That was a tough job. But there was so much abuse and negativity and depression. There were days I was walking to the shipyard. It was about a 45-minute walk. So at Ingalls, there's 30,000 extra people that come into Pascagoula every day. And so I got a job at Ingalls, and I was like, I'm just going to do this until I can figure out what I want to do with my life. So I got this job. I was excelling so good. I was one of the top apprentices in my entire class. I never missed one single, I take that back. I missed one day, but it was for a funeral, and it was for a friend of mine. And I was an excused absence. I think I worked like half that day and then went to the funeral. But in 2 years, I never missed one day. I was never late once, and I never left early. And I had the top grade in all of my classes at Ingalls. And so it's like, so here I am exceeding in the secular world. Never had shipyard experience. I never had any type of experience in that. I was abused verbally, mentally, not physically, but, well, he did kick chairs and throw things several times. So this pastor was a mental case, an absolute nut job. If the community knew what this pastor has done and said, and I do have screenshots and receipts, I could pull out receipts that church would close its doors immediately. So this podcast is not about that, but that is the biggest turning point in my life. So I need you to understand. The reason I'm bringing this up is hopefully maybe this will touch someone out there who's gone through something similar. Maybe not a church. Maybe you're working a job and you're underneath a very, very oppressive leader, and you're like, I can't flourish here. Like, I felt that every creative idea that I had would be shut down, and everyone else would be like, man, that's a genius. And like, but because it wasn't the pastor's idea, it was a bad idea, So anyways, I worked at Ingalls and worked there for 2 years, gave everything I could, man. I showed up. My foreman would always brag on me, man. I was outworking the first class people in my crew all the time. So I'll never forget this, though, is like I would cry every day. Like at Ingalls, I'd walk in and I just felt so depressed, like I was a failure because I wasn't working in the ministry. And I felt like because I wasn't doing music for a job, I set aside so much of my life dedicated to this, and all of a sudden it's ripped away and I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't want to do it anymore. So here I am at like 30 years old trying to figure out what to do with my life. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with my life anymore. And so at Ingalls, there's 30,000 extra people that come in every day. So you park, and then you have to walk like 25 minutes to the gate. It's crazy. And then depending on where you work in the yard, you may have another 20 or 30 minute walk to your ship. So like I can just remember, man, I would just quote Bible verses. I would listen to Stephen Furtick messages. I would listen to Tim Tebow messages. Like I would just, as I was walking in, which is one of the most depressing things ever. One of the guys who's worked at Ingalls there, he worked there for like 50 years. He said the hardest part about this job is walking to that gate because it's such a heavy. If you work at Ingalls or a shipyard, you know what I'm talking about. It was tough. But there were times, man, I would just cry the whole way. I was just so overwhelmed. I felt like such a failure. I felt like I let my family down, let my kids down. But I gave everything I had. And I worked in the biggest ship they had, which is an aircraft carrier, basically. And I worked in the lowest level of the engine room. So the biggest, dirtiest, darkest spot of any ship that you could imagine, I was there. And I hated the engine room. I didn't want to be in there. But I started to realize that like the closest I ever felt to God was when I was furthest away from what I thought he called me to do. So because I felt like I was so far away from worship leading and so far away from ministry, and I was literally at the lowest point of this ship. Like there was no one lower. Like I was in the bilges. I was crawling under the bilges of the bottom of this ship. And I just felt like a failure, but I learned to really trust God and just give my best. So once again, I said, no matter where I'm at, I'm going to give my best. So I remember working at LHA, and I remember getting a call one day. My foreman said, hey, they want to see you over at the wet dock. All the white hats and general foremans, general superintendents, they need to see you. And usually that means you're getting fired. Like no one ever gets called up there. Like I worked with people all the time who would smell of drugs and alcohol, and they'd be like, all right, you're going to the wet dock. Like basically kangaroo court is what they called it, because they kicked you out and you'd be hopping all the way to the gate. So kangaroo court, my foreman comes in, he's like, Chris, I need to see you at kangaroo court. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I cannot lose another job. You know what I'm saying? Like I didn't do anything to deserve to be fired from that church I worked at. Actually, I did everything extra to prove that I had every right to be there. So I was like, oh my gosh, like I haven't done anything. I've never been late. I've never missed a day. I've never done anything. And so they called me in there. I walk in this room. Actually, I was in the waiting room to go in to see all the white hats. And there was like 3 people who were fired in front of me. There's a big line of people. One dude comes out. He's all pissed off and like yelling and cussing. One girl comes out. She's like crying. That's literally where you go to like be fired. So basically it comes to my turn. Open the door. I come in, and there's like probably 15, 20 people at this huge table. They all have white hats. White hats are like supervisors. They're, foremans, general foremans, superintendents, general superintendents, like the top dogs. So I go in and they're like, hey, Mr. Stafford, and you just sit down. I'm like, oh my God. I'm just thinking in my head, like, this is all happening again. Like I'm about to be fired for something I didn't do. Well, the general superintendent looks at me and he says, we just want to take the time to thank you for your hard work and for your dedication. And they said, so we focus on the things that people do wrong. And this is what the general superintendent told me. He said, for all these men, he said, here we tend to focus on all the things wrong that the employees do. We have to write people up. We have to fire them. And he said, but today we're going to break that. And he said, we wanted to call you in to praise you for all the hard work you're doing. He said, you are top of your class academically. You are top of your class on your craft. Your past 2 foremen have done nothing but brag about you. And they just said that they were super pleased to have me work at Ingalls. And the general superintendent told me, and I'll never forget this. He said, if you as so much stub your toe Mr. Stafford, here at the shipyard, and you need help, he said, you call me directly because you are one of our most valued employees that we have in the electrical apprentice department. And I'm sitting here like, of course, I just start boohooing. I'm like crying. All these grown men are like, why is this dude like crying? But it was such an overwhelming experience because I have been told the past 3-4 years of my life that I was nothing. I was worthless. I was garbage, that my talents would never amount to anything. And then all of a sudden I step into a new industry that I've never been in, no experience, and I'm the top apprentice in that class. And all these men, and they started clapping for me. They stood up. One guy came over and like bro hugged me. He's like, dude, you are killing it. And I just told him, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm crying. I was like, this is just overwhelming to me that someone sees good in me and that they want to call me out for that. So it was an amazing experience. The next transition point in my life, which was another turning point, is there was another church in Ocean Springs at the time that we started attending, and this pastor was really, really adamant about me coming on staff. And I was like, nope, I ain't never working at a church again. I've been burned too many times. Like, I was falsely accused. I was lied about. I was kicked out on the street. I said, I'm not doing it. Well, this pastor, for about a year, maybe a year and a half, was pursuing me and my wife. They would invite us to dinner like once a month. They'd take us out, spend all this money. Oh man, you're perfect. You're perfect. You're going to work for us. You're going to work for us. Every time I see him, you're going to be on our staff. You're going to be on our staff. And part of me was like, okay, maybe this is my redemption of, I still have somewhat of a desire to do music. I felt like maybe this was a way to get me back in the ministry. And this was a way to get me back into my passions. Still super depressed at this point. So long story short, I quit the shipyard. Stupid mistake. Actually, it wasn't stupid because I wouldn't be at the job I am now if I didn't have it. But I quit the job, started working at this church. And after about a month, I'll let you try to take a guess. Same thing happened. I was brought on board because they knew I had a lot of musical talent and a lot of media and video talent. And they wanted me, I was told when I was hired, to bring my creative ideas to help another department so that we could kind of kick the church up another notch. So when I got there, like, we designed a new logo, whole church went through a rebranding. I was in charge of all that. I was asked to help lead worship. I was brought on as the media director. So I did all the media stuff. Once again, I did the announcement videos. I did the countdown videos. I did everything. I was doing all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, like, I started getting lied upon again. People would be like, oh, Chris, the pastor would call me in his office and be like, hey, well, we got to talk, man. I heard you did this. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, yeah, you did that. And I'm like, no, like, I don't even know what you're saying right now. And he's like, yeah, well, you need to go apologize to this person. And I'm like, I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do. And my job was basically threatened again. I was forced to apologize for numerous things that I never did at that church. And so after a while, they started getting mad that I was giving suggestions, what I was brought on to do. So I was like, hey, I'm really talented at music. The worship pastor was like, hey, we want your ideas. We want your help. That person was out of town one time and I got to lead practice. Well, then they crucified me for how I led practice. I mean, I was ripped from ear to ear. Like, it was just like the first church I worked at. Very narcissistic, very abusive, verbally abusive. I was lied at every day. We'd go into staff meetings and like, I'd be the only one happy. Like, I'd be cutting jokes and like laughing before I got in here. Then like, I was like the life of the party. That's who I used to be. Well, then he'd say, Chris, I need you to stay in my office. We're going to have a discussion. So I was like, okay, what's up? And he goes, you were so negative and depressing today, and you brought down the tone of the whole staff meeting. I'm like, were you in the same meeting that I was in? Because everyone was rolling. There was a lot of old people there. I was making jokes and not just being stupid like class clown funny. Like, I was encouraging. Like, I got along with everybody. I thought the whole staff loved me. And I literally would have to go around to the staff meeting, to different staff members, and apologize for being negative. I'd be like, to the children's pastor, I'd be like, hey, knock, knock, need to apologize for being overly depressed and sad today. And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're always the life of the staff meetings. I'm like, no, I've got to apologize to you. So I had to go around. I was always forced to apologize about everything. I was always the first one there, last one to leave, while the pastor was out golfing 3 or 4 days a week. It was crazy. So I was getting very much depressed again. I'm like, I've got to find a job. So I started looking for other jobs. I'm like, this is crazy, man. Like, I succeed at so many jobs. Every job I've ever been at, I've been promoted, I've been praised, I do great at, except for working at a church. And so I was like, this is not for me. I can't do this. So I was very respectful. Never had any issues with any of the pastor or staff. And, there was one time, one of the pastors called me in his office and he was like, hey, we heard that, someone over in the church overheard you screaming at one of your volunteers. And I was like, I don't scream at anybody. What are you talking about? I'll get mad now because I don't deal with all that stuff now, but I was still very much like tail between the legs, like, yes, sir, what's going on? They're like, yeah, one of the church members overheard you screaming Sunday morning at your volunteers, and we need you to go to apologize to the volunteer and the church member. And I was like, but hold up, like, I didn't scream at anybody. And they're like, but you still have to go apologize. And I was like, but I didn't scream at anybody. And so I was forced to go apologize again. So I went to one of my media team. I pulled them to the side one Sunday and said, hey guys, I just want to apologize to y'all. It's brought to my attention that apparently I was really mean and aggressive to y'all, that I yelled at y'all. And they were all like, Chris, you've never done that to us your entire life. You're always the opposite. You're encouraging, you're uplifting. And I was like, well, I was told that I have to apologize to y'all. And they're like, but you didn't do anything. So why are you apologizing? I was like, I was told I was wrong. So I asked the pastor, I said, well, who told you that? And they're like, well, we can't tell you who made that accusation. I'm like, if you can't tell me who lied about me, then I'm not going to apologize. And I said, so if an accusation was brought to you, if someone said, hey, Chris said this, I want to know who said that because it's not true. And someone is once again spreading lies. So went through all of this. It was crazy, depressing, super sad. Once again, I never wanted to do it. So I got called into his office one Monday morning. The Sunday before that, the day before, everything was great. He was like, pat me on the back, like such a two-faced liar. Like, oh, you're doing great. He was always nice to me in public, but chewed me out in private. Like, it was the week before Christmas. Everyone was like dressing up. So I wore like a Grinch shirt, and he called me in his office and chewed me out and was like, you go home and change out of that garbage right now. And I was like, but I'm wearing a Christmas t-shirt, like around the church. Like, I'm the media pastor. The youth pastor is doing the same thing. So it's like everyone on staff was allowed to do things, but I was not allowed to do them. So the Sunday before, everything was cool. Monday morning, calls me in his office. He's like, hey, you're fired. And I'm like, for what? Like, immediate, like, get your stuff, pack your stuff up and leave. I was like, I didn't do anything. Like, well, what did I do? And he was like, there's just a lot of things being said about you and you're just not a good fit for our team. And I'm like, but they couldn't tell me anything that I had done. All they had were lies and accusations. And they're like, well, someone said they heard you say this. And I was like, nope. And I offered to call that person. They're like, so let's say Joe. They're like, someone overheard you and Joe telling dirty jokes in the congregation. I was like, well, that's not true. I was like, I can call Joe. And they're like, no, we're not interested in that. I was like, but you're accusing me. So let me call and get the truth. Not just to try to save my job at the time, but to save my integrity, my character. Like you're telling me I'm doing these things and I haven't. So multiple times I had proof. I was trying to call people in the meeting. I was like, hold on, do you mind if I get them on the phone to clarify? And they weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in their agenda to remove me from the team. Probably because my level of excellence and integrity brought out their lack of excellence and integrity in their situations. And so it got to the point where I would always have to come in and clean up everybody's mess. And I was like, just because, there's a lack of preparation on your part doesn't mean that constitutes a state of emergency for my part. And I was like, it's not going to happen. So long story short, got fired. No warning, no nothing. Gone. Fired. Get your stuff. Get out of here. Gone. So once again, me and my family are put out on the street for something I didn't do. So I got a job at Chick-fil-A, making $13 an hour. It's fantastic. So during that time, I was really depressive. Like, I remember I would be driving down the highway, and there were times I had to pull over because I was tempted just to jerk the wheel and kill myself because I just felt like I had nothing to live for. I felt like everything had been robbed from me. Everything had been taken from me. I was not the same person that I used to be. I had no joy. I had no desire. I had no passion, no ambition. It was very, very painful. So I was working at Chick-fil-A part-time, making $13 an hour. It was the lowest point in my life. I'd see people from high school who come up and they were like, hey, like, you're working at Chick-fil-A at like 34 years old. And I'm like, I'm a failure. I felt like an absolute failure. I'm like, I have done so much. I have a college degree. I was an award-winning musician for years. I was so depressed. Like, there were days I'd pull up to the parking lot. I was driving 45 minutes because I was searching everywhere for jobs. Nowhere was hiring me. I was going to work at Domino's for like $5 an hour being a driver. Well, the guy I went to church with was like, hey man, he ran a Chick-fil-A. He's like, hey, I'll get you a job. Got a job there. Guess what? I excelled so much at that job. They were wanting me to train and become one of the managers. I was even thinking about maybe opening one of my own stores. So like, everyone loved me there. Everyone. So once again, I'm at a job where I excel and I'm excellent at everything that I do except for churches. And so the ministry is the only place that I've ever been beat down for my excellence and creativity. I'm not saying all churches are like that, But in my experience, that's how it was. And I was like, I'm never doing this again, never. If you offered me $1 million to work at a church, still wouldn't do it. I had the idea to start my own business. I was like, hey, so I got a drone. And I was like, maybe I can just do real estate. Now, I really wasn't wanting to like start a business. I just was flying for fun. And I was like, maybe if I form an LLC, maybe people will want to hire me. So I started an LLC. I got my FAA license because you cannot fly for hire unless you have your pilot's license. So I got my pilot's license, got my LLC, started my own business, still had no idea what I was doing. I knew how to edit videos more than I knew about video production. I still didn't know anything about video cameras. I just knew that like I was good at what I did. Like people enjoyed, I always got great feedback at what I did. So I was like, I'm just start a business. So I was filming everything on my phone at the time, and I had a little gimbal for my phone, and I had like a cheap $300 little drone, and I was just in love with it. It was the first time in almost 10 years that I was happy. It really was. I say 10 years, probably 6 to 7 years is the first time. And so I was like, this is something I could do. And so when I first started my business, it was like graphic design, web design, and like drones. That was it. Well, I started getting people asking me to do more drone stuff and more video production. So I get a business credit card because I was poor. I didn't have no money. So I would just like max out my credit card and just buy camera stuff that I knew, just the minimum basics. And so long story short, all of that happened, and God has just really blessed my business. At that time, right when I started my business, I actually got a job at Signet Maritime, started as a deckhand. So then I decided the route of engineer was interesting to me. So I started training as engineer. Lo and behold, I get promoted to engineer, training for my chief engineer's license, waiting for the letter back from the Coast Guard now. So long story short, I know I've kind of dived into where I started, the things that I went through, and why Stafford Studios exists. Well, it exists because, first off, flying a drone was the closest thing I could ever be to being Superman. And Superman was my idol growing up. Like, I mean, bruh. I'm going to try to find some pictures and put in this video. Like, I can remember being like 2, 3, 4 years old and just having like Superman costumes and underwear. I'd always curl my hair. Like, that was it. My drone's first name was Clark Kent. It's crazy. So anyways, I started getting a passion for this. And then I would make a video and then someone else would call. So anyways, I started getting more and more clients and started making more and more money. And I'm like, hey, when I started Stafford Studios, it wasn't like I'm going to start a business to take over the coast, or I want to start a business and have all these team members and do all this stuff. I was like, that's not what it was. I just did it because it was the only thing besides my kids that brought me joy. It was the only thing in my life that was like, that I was passionate about and that I was good at. So I did a video for a client, and they entered one of my videos into a local competition, American Advertising Federation, where they promote, and it's a competition between filmmakers. They entered one of the videos I did for them. So I filmed the video, but I didn't edit it. So they had one of their editors in-house do it. And it's not to knock their editing, but I take pride. I'm really good at editing and piecing footage together and color grading. So anyways, I handed my footage to them. They kind of like they didn't make it look very good, but it won a silver Addy. And I was like, hold up. So this won footage that I filmed, and I was still learning. It was just drone footage. I was still learning. I brought my camera on the boat tour, but still learning about video production. So I was like, okay, if I can film something and not even really know what I'm doing, hand it off to somebody, them butcher my work through editing, then maybe I can enter my own work and I'll do really good. So the following year, I entered some of my own work, and I won 2 golds. I won the best of show, best of online film and sound. And I was like, this is it. We're cooking now. So all that to be said, I wanted to make this podcast introducing myself, because if you would have told me when I was 16 that I was going to be an engineer on a tugboat and was going to own my own video production studio, I would have laughed at you, like 200% laughed. So all of this, I wanted to share my background because I'm hoping that maybe there's someone out there who maybe you're interested in video, maybe you're interested in media or, content creation, social media. I don't know, whatever it is. I just wanted to make this to encourage someone that whatever you're going through is for a purpose. And even though you may think, what am I supposed to learn from this? Sometimes you're not always in a situation. You're not always going to learn what to do. You're going to learn what not to do. situations, you're going to learn how to not treat people. You're going to learn how to not lie, how to overcome these things. And so I just want to encourage you. This podcast is not always going to be like this. I'm hoping to maybe have 20, 30-minute podcasts where I'll have a guest on. We'll have some questions. But since the revamp of this podcast, I just wanted to introduce myself. This is very hard for me. It's very uncomfortable to be vulnerable because I'm basically spilling the last 10 years of my life and everything that I've went through, the hardships I've went through. But I'm hoping that it will encourage somebody out there, whether or not you're in the ministry, whether or not you're into music or video, no matter what you're doing. Chances are you have a pretty sucky boss. Chances are you've been treated unfairly at work. Chances are your creativity and ideas have been shot down. Chances are you've lost your passion. And I'm just here to tell you that sometimes God can open doors and develop new passions inside of you that can take you further than your old passions ever could. And that's really powerful for me. God has blessed every penny I make. I never pay myself through my business, but everything I make, I always give 10%. I always pay tithes off of everything my business makes. And then I pay my taxes first. Pay taxes, which is like most of the money. So I pay taxes, pay tithes, I pay my guys on my team, and then I put it into an account. I never pay myself, but I put it into the account to save up so if I ever need to buy equipment or gear. All that being said is I truly hope that maybe my story can touch someone out there who's listening to just not give up. Whatever you're going through. I got on depression medicine and anxiety medicine. It really helped. I have a super supportive wife, loving family. My kids are just the joy of my life. I love them more than anything. You may have clicked on this podcast and you're like, wait, I thought this was about video production. I thought this was about creative content. And that will be. But this first episode, I feel like I just wanted to kind of set things clear and say, how did Stafford Studios start? And, I may be the only person listening to this 20 years down the road. It'll still be here. But I wanted to share because I just hope that I can prevent someone else from going through what I had to go through. And so if you feel like maybe this podcast has helped you, maybe encouraged you any, man, hit a like, hit a subscribe, inbox me, you can email me. My email is chris@staffordstudios.media. Let me know because I'm interested in doing life with people. I don't want to just get a bunch of clients. I don't want to just make a lot of money. Money part is good. But that's not what I want it to be about. I wish I had other creative people with me and around me when I was in the lowest point of my life. So you may have zero interest in production, in music, in entertainment, whatever it is. But I hope and pray that maybe there's one person out there who listens to this podcast that'll say, I've been through a lot too, and I'm going to give God another chance because, usually when a door is shut, another door is open, but only the door that God can open. Not he has like the master key. So you may be trying to go through like a little short Oompa Loompa door, and that door shuts, and you're like, man, that was the door I'm supposed to go through. And then here, God has got like Disney World gates like opening, like that may be the door he's trying to open for you. And so I just want to encourage anybody out there, especially if you're in the creative world, because creative people really have a hard time being successful and keeping that mindset of creativity when they're being constantly slammed and derailed and told you're not good enough. And so I'm here to tell you, you are good enough. You are passionate enough. If you have a passion and a desire to create things, and create it. Even if no one else looks at it, create it for you, because you need to remember that falling in love with the passion of creating art is all about creating art. It's not about who looks at it, So I really hope that this podcast and this message has touched someone today. Please let me know if it has. I hope you continue to tune in. We really are going to have some shorter podcasts, actually with guests. I've got several people that I want to interview, and not even if they're just local business owners. There's a guy that owns a pizza shop. I want to interview him because I want to talk to people who have a high achievers mindset. So if you've stuck through this, I applaud you. I wish I could send you like a Chick-fil-A gift card. But thank you for sticking through this podcast. I just want you guys to know that anything is possible, and that a dream that dies is like having a person in your family die. When there's a death of a dream and a death of a passion, it's very painful. And unless if you've never had a dream or a passion that you're so passionate about that is crucified like mine was, then you may not understand how tough it is. But I can vividly remember being in my Jeep, pulling over on Highway 63 because I had the urge to turn the wheel and kill myself. And I stopped myself, and I pulled over, and I sat for about 15 minutes. I just cried. I was like, God, I can't do this anymore. Like, the person I used to be was destroyed. sometimes you got to go through the fire. Sometimes you have to be compressed so that that diamond can shine. And so seriously, I hope and pray that anybody who is listening to this will get something out of it, that no matter if you've been burned by a church, by a job, by a family member, I've been through a lot, and somehow God still has his hand in his favor on me. And so I just want to encourage you to keep going, that more is possible, better is possible. And that's one of my favorite quotes. I'm going to end with this. My favorite quote. Benjamin Franklin said this, that if better is possible, good is not enough. Meaning that if you can do better, don't just do good. Be the best you can be. And so I want to leave you with that. If you feel like anything you can do, when I was working at the bank, and one of my main jobs was to copy hundreds of pages at a time of insurance papers. And I told myself, you know what? I'm going to be the best photocopier in this whole bank, which sounds stupid, but I made that decision. No matter what I'm going to do, I'm going to honor God. When I was in the hull of those ships, I said, I'm going to be the best electrician. Every time I was putting in bolts or screws or running cable through the bulkheads, I said, you know what? I'm going to build this as if it's God's ship. I'm going to honor him in everything that I can do, because ultimately it is his. And I want to do everything I can to the glory of God. And there's still people at my job who still get aggravated at me because I work hard and I do good. There would be other deckhands who would say, man, why do you work so much? Why you try so much? Why are you always trying to paint? Because my personal integrity does not allow me to be lazy. Now, there are times that like being lazy is good. My personal integrity does not allow me to do anything less than excellence. So be encouraged, be blessed. Please like and subscribe to the Stafford Studios Podcast. But I just want you to know that if no one else tells you, I'm proud of you. Even if I don't know you, I'm proud of you. I love you. I support you. Let me know what you think of this podcast. Email me, text me, DM me, something. I want to know, because this is a very different podcast. It's been very difficult, kind of tricky, and I'm very hesitant to even talk about these things, because I'm not trying to talk bad about this church. I'm not trying to talk bad about that church or this shipyard. I'm telling you my story. There's a story. You know, every story has a villain and every story has a successor. And I am determined to succeed. I will achieve my goals, and I will not let my oppressors change the fact that I'm going to be the best that I can be. Do not let the opinion and the voice of other people, especially if they're not in your inner circle, determine what you do with your life and how hard you work for the things that you love in life. Don't let them do it. Here's one other thing I'm going to leave you with. Sorry. You will never be criticized by someone doing more than you. It's always the people who do less than you who are going to criticize you and lie and have something to say and find something negative because you're outshining them. And that's the thing. Your positive spirits irritate the internal demons of the people around you. So it's not you, it's them. So if I had to leave you with one thing, it's just keep your head up, stay positive. This is probably the longest podcast in the history of all podcasts, because I love to talk to people. I love to share. And this is my story. My story was a long story. It started with passion and with music and with a desire to be a singer and songwriter. And I went through multiple years of abuse, verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, mental abuse, where I was borderline suicidal. And at the end, I found a job that I love, that I'm great at, that I excel at, that I'm constantly told I'm doing an amazing job at now. And I've started a very successful video production company. And I have guys on my team that work with me and that I can give them opportunities to learn and develop their desire and their passions for creativity and for filmmaking and for flying a drone. I mean, Lucas Nason's a high school student. He's already got his FAA license, and he is one of the best drone pilots I've ever seen. And Austin Sines is a great videographer on my team, met him through Venture, and he is just, they're so gifted at what they do. And that's what makes me happy. That's what blesses me, is being able to give the opportunity to other people that I never got. So if this podcast is for you, hit subscribe. I'm going to be posting hopefully 1 to 2 podcasts a month, starting out with, just to try to be consistent, because my workload is so large at the moment. But if there's someone that you think in the community that I should interview, let me know. Drop a comment. Let me know. I've got several people in mind. I've got musicians. I've got composers. I've got business owners. I've got several people that that I'm going to interview. But this podcast is not just about music, movies, and entrepreneurs now. It's about everything. It's just about being successful at life and being a high achiever. That's what I love. And there may be certain podcasts where we talk about Game of Thrones. There may be certain podcasts where we talk about Superman movies. There may be podcasts where we talk about, having clients on retainer and how to get them on retainer and move away from the one-off projects. There's going to be all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you so much for watching. Visit us online. My website is www.staffordstudios.media. Check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. all those. LinkedIn, check us out, leave a comment, please subscribe so we can let you know next time we drop a podcast. I know some of you don't have 3 weeks to listen to one podcast because this one is extremely long. I can guarantee my wife is probably like, why is this podcast so long? Even if I'm the only one that made this podcast, I feel like it's so good to get this off my chest. I feel like that I've been holding a lot of this, not holding all this in, but that I haven't really told a lot of this stuff to anybody. And so this is my story. And if you're one of those people who crushed me and tried to crush me and you get your feelings hurt, then sorry, because I'm on the uprise. I'm climbing the mountain, I'm going to the top, and I'm trying to pull as many people along with me as I can. But at the same time, those people who are trying to pull you down, not listening to you. Unless you have an immediate seat at my table in my life, I don't listen to you. So, be blessed, be creative, be excellent. See you next time.